excited to have you on this video. I've thought about this for such a long time because Danie is one of those people who frequents our office away from the office, which for some of you, you'll know is Alchemy Coffee Roasters just down the road. And Danie, because he works so hard in all of these remote places, he comes in the morning and that's his social time. And for me, it's my work time, but I'm always torn between, I want to talk to Danie and I want to chat to people and I'm trying to work at the same time. But Danie is also somebody who we've used for our own photography before. And I think one of the things I've heard the most from Danie is, Jane, no woman that I ever photograph is happy with her photo. Because I'm always like, oh, look at that, look at that. He's like, Jane, just accept it. It's never going to look exactly the way you want it to look. So I love that. I love the years of experience you have in this industry. And so for our talk today, which for some of you who will know and some of you who are newer, you won't know, we run these virtual masterclasses every month. It started during lockdown, and it's really just a focus on how we can give back to people and encourage people, which was through the pandemic. And now we just decided to carry on coming out of the pandemic. So it's anything to help people in interviews. And today, if you've seen the post, you'll see it's all about first impressions. And I think one of the things I find most interesting is when I train hiring managers on how to hire the right people, they always tell me about how they go and look at people's social media profiles and they look at candidates and they often make unfair judgments on somebody's profile based on their picture, and they look at Facebook and they look at all the things they probably shouldn't look at, but they do. And then they're also really surprised when I tell them, do you know that candidates do the same to you? And then they think, oh, hang on, I haven't thought about my profile as an interviewer. And in this new world of work, people deciding, do I actually even want to come to the interview? And I told that story about the recruiter who sent out an invitation to a candidate and the candidate declined it. She said, no, I don't think you're for real. I think you're scamming me because I can't see anything about you on social media. And so we do have people who are more keen on social media, people who are less keen on social media, but it's here to stay and we can't avoid it. So we're here today to learn from Danie. If you're making your first impression before you actually meet someone virtually or in person, how do you give yourself the best chance to create a very positive personal and professional brand? But I know the whole field of photography is quite wide. So Danie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience in photography, your focus, and your thoughts about your field. Over to you.
Thanks, Jane. And thanks so much for having me. I mean, it's quite an honor. It's always daunting, when you're a guest or presenting a masterclass, you open yourself up for a lot of criticism, and especially in something like this. Even before I speak about my experience, whatever, I think what's important to remember, there's not a catch-all in photography specifically. There's not a rule book that says, if you do things XYZ, this is how people will perceive it, so it's always subjective. So it's a very fluid thing. It's context and intent based. One just needs to bear that in mind. Having said that, so I've been freelance now for 22 years, and I've worked in the magazine industry for the first 10 or so, more or less. And then after that, it's been corporates, and I work with a lot in the wine industry where there's a lot of personality. So there's a lot of, portrait work actually in that. Corporate, I work a lot with some of the big corporates like Sanlam Investment Services, some of the smaller investment firms. I've done work with authors, I've done work with artists, sports people, so I've covered the gamut of portrait possibilities, even technical people and the mining industry. Tomorrow I'll be going to Johannesburg to shoot portraits of people in the meat industry. So it's quite varied. I do work in video production as well, but people are always kind of part of that, and with that, it's normally the purpose of these images would normally be some sort of a public facing presentation, so I know in the topic that we're discussing today, it's more about a first impression to a possible employer or to a candidate that you're interviewing. But sort of my work generally would cover any sort of, let's call it a communications purpose. It's not necessarily personal portraits, it's more, it's business to business communications. That's it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Danie. I mean, I think in those portraits, though, and I've seen a lot of the ones that you've done, and you've told me about different shoots that you've done. People are trying to create an impression. They've got a brand, they're trying to promote their brand, they're trying to attract their target market. So in your view, what is the impact of somebody seeing your photo before they actually meet you, either virtually or in person?
I think it's irreplaceable in the sense that, like first impressions last. I think that's true. I mean, I just think of, for instance, my wife, she'll spend time on a WhatsApp contact list and just check people's profiles. If somebody contacted her for business, she'll, always click on the photo and see what the person looks like. So it's, that is where the first impression visually is going to be made, and it's difficult to reverse that. So I think it's once somebody has seen a picture of you and they meet you, they're going to measure you to the picture that they saw. So that's important. Again, the context that we're working at, I'm going to try and sort of keep my general comments maybe sort of in the corporate sphere, more or less, because I mean, these things differ if you go out into the art industries and stuff like that. There's a slightly different thing, but I think the truism is still that, what people see maybe on a LinkedIn profile picture or on a Facebook or whatever, or an article that's published in your face, a picture of your face goes with it. They're going to measure their first encounter with you to that picture. And they're probably going to try and, they're probably going to treat you first off in the way that they perceive you to be in that picture.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And we know from that first impression, that usually creates about 3 to 5 seconds where somebody makes a judgment on someone. And then we have a confirmation bias that kicks in, where people unconsciously seek out information to confirm the judgment they've already made. Yeah. So I appreciate your point that once you've created a first impression, it's very difficult to judge that and to budge that at least. Sometimes they say it takes up to 20 encounters to budge that. If you get a chance.
A good example is, for instance, when our new mayor was elected for Cape Town a couple of months ago, my wife saw a picture online. I think it was on IOL or something, and it wasn't it's not a picture he chose, obviously, and it was just taken from an angle, whatever, and there was just something in his expression, and she said, I don't trust him, I don't like him, no encounter with him, doesn't know what he's about, what he stands for, nothing. It was literally that picture. And even now, when she hears he says something on the radio, like, I don't know, I don't trust him, So, and that's the power of a first impression, because you will deal with people that's that quick to judge, So
No, that's very scary. It's like you've got this one open window chance.
Yeah.
So, but Danie, there's so many different types of profile photos. And I've heard from some people, they try to kind of have a really glamorous one. And then I actually have a friend who says she deliberately puts a really bad photo out there, so that when people meet her, they're pleasantly surprised. But then again, she doesn't run a marketing company. She's a teacher. She's a teacher, so she's not concerned about people, contacting her for business. But what trends have you seen in portrait photos over the years?
Like I said, it's very important that one qualify again what a portrait is meant for. It's always any sort of visual communication or collateral that you have has to be measured against what's the context that it's going to be used in and what's the intent. Who is it aiming at? So broadly speaking, with the type of clientele that you maybe would work with, and I think the average person, I'm going to sort of focus sort of on what generally corporate, that would be management, finance, legal. If we're speaking about ad agency interviews, you might have a slightly different vibe, when it comes to trends. I think when I started 20 years back, it was definitely for men, the tie and jacket revolution that just started happening. Everybody was going against the jacket and against the tie, and it was like kind of making a statement. I think women have a little bit more play when it comes to, how they dress for a particular shot, I think men, you're kind of stuck with the dress shirt, tie, jacket, no jacket. That's basically it, then it's colors. But what I have noticed in the maybe in the last 2-3 years is that there's a return to more formal dress for portraits. Again, speaking about the general corporate arena. However, when it comes to how it's shot, the style of the shot, there's quite a heavy lean towards there needs to be kind of a lifestyle feel to it, or a natural. People use words like natural, or it needs to be real. So even though the person's dressed really smartly, they want to have a sort of a image that suggests that they are approachable or real, and they're not fake, so that drive for authenticity is there. Even though the irony is that sometimes in the push for authenticity, people maybe don't always present themselves in the way they truly are. So I think generally there's a better balance now between formal and informal. Like I said, years back, like a decade ago, people were riling against the whole formal thing. And, CEOs had to be, photographed in their T-shirts and stuff like that. It started with Bill Gates and a lot of the guys in Silicon Valley. But I think now there's a healthier balance. And there's companies tend to, I find, for instance, Asylum Investment Services or RCM, or these type of guys, they are better at maybe guiding their spokespeople into how, so they're a little bit more involved in what that final image should look like, what the final dress and all that type of thing would look like. Whereas there was a stage where it was kind of like, as long as the guy is wearing a black shirt or a white shirt or a black jacket, we don't really care. I think companies are managing the profile of all the employees a little bit more strictly, but in that, it's not necessarily seriously formal or informal. They try and find a good balance between those. I think in terms of lighting, getting more technical, whereas maybe 20 years or 15 years or 10 years ago, it was all about flat lighting and it needed to be very clear. And, and the reason for that was because a lot of the imagery would go to paper, to newspapers. That's got a 96 dpi print quality. It's really bad. So if you're on a dark background like I am now, if you were to put that in a newspaper, it would just bleed. The image would just bleed and look really messy. So they insisted on like light color backgrounds because it just printed better. And so that forced a lot of your type of imagery that you would use for any sort of corporate thing. And that created the trend that people thought corporate pictures or professional profiles need to be on a white background or a light background. With the advent of screens where you've got backlighting, suddenly it started becoming more acceptable to have dark backgrounds. And with that came, it's not unusual for people to have in their professional profiles really moody shots. As long as that mood is not negative or it's not mysterious or scary, I think that's something that's actually grown quite a bit. The lighting is quite cinematic, and people get away with a lot more in terms of styling. Yeah.
In fact, speaking of backgrounds, I see Chantal has put a comment in the chat there saying she really loves your virtual background and would love to know why it looks so different from normal virtual backgrounds.
Well, I'll show you why. Real.
I thought that I still wanted to make a joke and say, unless you're actually sitting in front of a garage door,
Yeah,
but it's amazing.
So this is in my
amazing.
Studio. We're in my studio,
Right.
and so this is a roller door that I use for back access, but it's painted black, so I use it because if you put red lights and things against it, it becomes a textured wall. So it's one of those
It looks
things
like a
you work in
movie
small
screen you put
space,
behind.
you double things up, yeah.
Right.
It
Okay.
does look awesome, I agree. So Danie, speaking of colors, so you're talking about moody and colors, and you're talking about, okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be formal or informal. What is the impact of color on the people seeing that profile? I call them profile pictures, you call them portraits.
Again, it's contextual. We're in an international, arena now. People getting interviewed for jobs virtually across continents. I mean, it's not unusual for people to live in Durbanville and work in America, you know. So one has to be aware of some of the cultural connotations. I mean, for us, black doesn't, like I'm wearing now, doesn't really mean death anymore. You know, it's not just the undertakers who wear that. It's become a fashion thing. And one has to bear in mind that for certain of the Eastern cultures, white is generally something you just wear to a funeral. So if you're going to be interviewing for a job in, you know, I don't know, South China or something, you got to be wary of maybe what their connotation to it is, or in parts of India. I think, you know, there's the tried and trusted, you know, white is always safe, it's clean. Black will give you an impression of serious, also it'll slim you down, it'll make you look a little bit thinner. But then things like blue is obviously, you know, the trustworthy, the safe, you know, why all medical companies and things have blue in their logos. Red can come across as exciting, dynamics, you know, intimidating. It depends again on what are you interviewing for, or what are you communicating. If you are maybe a counselor, or, you know, something like that, maybe red is not the way to go. But if you are in advertising or, you know, marketing manager, maybe red's exactly the way to go, you know. So there are some cultural connotations to colors. There's also some subliminal connotations to colors, the way that we just programmed. But I don't think one needs to be too worried about it. Again, these things, like I said, it's fluid, you know. I don't always respond the same way to, say, for instance, somebody wearing a red shirt, you know. It sounds silly, but so in the context that you're operating in, and also, I mean, I suppose dress with colors that suit your makeup if you're a lady, or if you're a guy, you know, you've got black rings under your eyes, maybe avoid wearing a black shirt because it's just going to emphasize it, you know. So I think there's just some practical considerations that maybe just takes a little bit of thought beforehand, but it's not necessarily, there's not really a trade secret, you know, to that.
And Danie, you've talked a little bit about gender, and, you know, we know that that is also a topic today that is more fluid, and that people identify with a certain gender. So is there a difference in your experience between how men and women present themselves, or what is considered acceptable in that line? Yes,
yeah. Sure, but that has a lot to do with also the individual personality, and culture does play a role here. You know, if you and it's we don't want to necessarily draw these parallels, but it is true. In my experience in the corporate scene, for instance, if you have with women, you'll find, say, lady who's Afrikaans speaking, white, you know, mid-50s or mid-40s, generally would just be more conservative in her dress, which is maybe just a cultural sort of thing. Whereas I find maybe a lady who's black in her late 40s or 50s would be slightly more flamboyant, you know. And so there's these things that you notice. There's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. I've just seen there are these trends, and some of that has to do with culture, you know, how we present ourselves. And I think it's all actually quite exciting and good. I think women are probably more concerned with looking bad, you know. So I find that, for instance, if there's a shoot booked, it's not uncommon for the lady to have had you know, an appointment with a hairstylist before, even makeup. Would take a lot more care with what she dresses. Normally comes with 3 extra outfits, you know. Oftentimes the guys kind of rock up and you're like, geez, could you just maybe iron your shirt before you come, you know, type of thing. So I think women generally just better prepared for the pictures. And I think I'm going to speak plainly here, and I hope nobody crucifies me. Generally, the concerns that women have is, one, I don't want to look old. So please avoid anything that, you know, shows that I have wrinkles, and there's certain lighting mitigations that you do for that. You'll have things like, I don't want to look overweight, you know, so slim me down. These are pretty much every person. And so what happens is that a lot of the pictures that you would take with maybe a lady is a little bit more glamorous, just because more effort has been done. The lighting for glam portraits, like, remember these 80s glam portraits, but the reason they looked the way they did was they were lit to get rid of wrinkles, to minimize a double chin. There's a reason I, for instance, would be lighting slightly from the top. It hides my double chin, so. And then also now you've got the phenomenon of people taking selfies and, this type of thing. Everybody does a selfie right up from here because it hides the double chin. Never mind the fact that the forehead suddenly looks enormous, but people have little things that they kind of fixate on. And there's a couple of those that's, I think, universal.
Yes.
Then the younger guys, they, there's a gamut of different type of responses I've had, but generally most guys think they look amazing, anyway. So they kind of rock up, and they just, especially if you're sort of middle management type of guys, they come with a bit of swag, and sometimes you need to remind them, maybe you should tuck your shirt or something. But there is definitely a trend with in certain industries, like I find in the finance industries, guys want to show off their watches because that's only the really the only jewelry men can wear in a corporate setting. So you'll find a lot of shots where the watch is suddenly showing, and especially now in the day and age of smartwatches, to have a Patek Philippe or something that's not a smartwatch is a statement. And so if your job has anything to do with affluence, like like if you're in finance, investment managers, these guys you'll notice will often show their watch. It's just it's a subliminal statement. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different. I mean, I photographed a bunch of actuaries like a month or so ago, and that was completely something different. They could not be bothered with how they come across. As far as they're concerned, they work with models and mathematics. And I mean, to get these guys just to wear a button-down shirt is a challenge. So that's you have your different takes. But I think as a general rule, men are a little bit more relaxed. Not to say that there are some guys who are supremely worried about what they look like, and then the images will reflect that, and then ladies generally will go for a slightly more glamorous look.
No, that's interesting, Danie. And I think something I think I've heard you say before is also that women and men come across differently if they cross their arms.
Yes.
That there's different angles or poses that would be translated differently in the eyes of someone who's judging them.
Correct. Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about poses for profile pics or portraits?
Sure. I think anybody who's worked in sales and had some sort of sales training will know some of the, like the basics, like don't get too close to the person you're trying to sell to, don't invade their space. And one of the things is don't cross your arms if you're trying to make a sale. But that is very relevant to men. And there's a reason for that. For us, it is a defensive posture, Well, it could be two reasons. You could have lower back issues like myself, and then if you cross your arms, it's, your back doesn't feel the pain. Or, and the way that a man crosses his arms immediately tucks up, our biceps are bigger. So immediately it closes off this whole section. So, and men like to do this, it's a rugby pose. It gives the sense, that he's big and strong, but it's also defensive. He's closed off. It's not a vulnerable position for a man. That's why rugby players will love to do this, they'll pull away from the camera as well. And it's to show I'm not available. I'm not vulnerable. And for practically, it's also a way that guys can make their biceps look bigger. It's stupid, but it's true. The flip side of that is, I mean, you sometimes see a guy, and that doesn't look too bad, but just when a woman in general cross their arms, it doesn't have the same message. Literally in the way that you cross your arms are crossed much lower than men. We cross our arms up here. Women tend to cross their arms down here. So it's almost like they're just hugging themselves in a way. It doesn't translate the same way. But what it does do is it is for women, it's a power pose. For a man, it's a defensive pose. And you'll see that if a woman's wearing like a business suit, and she crosses her arms, it doesn't, the suit still looks nice. It trims down, especially from the shoulders to the hips. It makes a straight line. It trims the lady down, especially if you're doing a sort of a midriff portrait. But I mean, there are instances where it doesn't look natural, or the dress or the shirt she's wearing doesn't, it doesn't fold well when she crosses her arms. But for the most part, it's not an aggressive pose. It's a forceful pose, but it's not defensive. It doesn't communicate negative connotations, where with men it does. It closes you off. And men, you find, especially guys who's actually insecure in front of a camera, maybe don't want to show it, they'll immediately cross their arms. And it's just it's subliminal messaging that people pick up on now.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And Danie, I think for most, like if somebody's going to be interviewing someone, the place where they'll be looking at their portraits or profile pictures, primarily they'll be looking at LinkedIn, but they'll also go and snoop around Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And the same for candidates who are going to be interviewed by someone. The first place they'll go is to LinkedIn, and then they'll also look at somebody's Facebook, Twitter. They may be on WhatsApp or not, but Instagram. So can you tell us a little bit about those specific photos on those platforms? Should they be the same, different? Yeah, tell us a bit more about that, please.
I think what's important is obviously what you use each platform for. LinkedIn, I don't really think anybody uses LinkedIn as a social tool. To connect with friends. If you use, I would imagine your personal Facebook profile is not meant to be for work purposes. So what I would say is that if you have a personal Facebook profile, what you should avoid posting on there in general is anything incriminating or that puts your employer, or prospective employer, makes them uneasy. I think that's kind of common sense. I wouldn't be too worried about what I post there, because that's really your communication to your friends and all. I think, in all honesty, your personal Facebook profile should be private. The same goes for Instagram. But there's a caveat here, and that is what industry are you in? I think that could have a impact on whether your personal profile will in any way influence your business profile.
No, sure, yes.
But I think when we look at business, you have a business profile and a brand that you're trying to put out there. One would probably look at Instagram, LinkedIn as the main one. Maybe you have a Facebook page relating to it. Google, people forget that Google has profiles as well, and Twitter. And I personally, I don't mind if your main profile image over all platforms is exactly the same. But for instance, LinkedIn has, I think, a round, the frame is round. Twitter will have a round thumbnail, but if you click on it, you'll see a big square image. In your Instagram, your stories will be round, but your main profile will be square. Your YouTube, we forget that YouTube is a social platform for business as well, that your profile picture there will be small and square with a big banner behind it. So I think it's a good thing if you have maybe one image, that sort of pulls through all of them, or at least an image from the same set of images. Say if you go for a shoot with a photographer and they're all the same style. So at least they're consistent. Maybe for the LinkedIn profile, you want something that's a little bit closer cropped. And it's a round profile picture. So you choose maybe a specific one that suits that, where you have a bit more space. Like, for instance, on Facebook, people tend to click on the profile image and it'll blow up bigger. Maybe there you could have a half-body portrait, but from the same shoot. I think that's important, so that, and here's this a silly thing. I mean, I had to change mine recently because I've had LASIK surgery. I grew a beard, all in the last 24 months. And I only realized the other day, but I don't look anything, and I lost 12 kilos. So I had to change it. I had to change it everywhere. And I think, especially for maybe ladies who, the one day your hair might be down, next day it might be a slightly different color, makeup might be different. for a guy, who's maybe checking out your profile, he might not even realize it's the same person, so.
No, interesting. I think something when we were chatting the other day, something I've been really reluctant to change is my WhatsApp profile pic.
Yeah.
I feel like, because I've always felt WhatsApp is a personal communication tool,
Yeah.
but I find more and more of my clients are WhatsApping me. And then I think, oh, should I change it? No. So yeah, what's your view on WhatsApp?
Yeah, this is a discussion I've had with my wife a couple of times, because she felt really strongly that there should be a picture of the two of us, a shot that she likes and she has good memories of and whatever. And I understand it's when she messages me, that's the image that she sees.
Yes.
But I find the same conundrum in that I'd say almost half of my business communications these days is on WhatsApp. Even though I'd prefer it not to be, it is. And more than that, it's not necessarily people I know that communicate. It's people, randomly message me about quotes and things like that. And so I find it frustrating when I get a WhatsApp image, a WhatsApp message from somebody, and I don't have them in my contact list, so I don't know who it is, and I don't put their name there. And then there's a picture of a baby's face. It makes it very difficult for me to know who I'm speaking to, And I've had that, actually people asking me, if they could, for work. I mean, I get a lot of people sort of contact me about assisting jobs and things like that. And then I'm like, I don't even know what you look like. I don't even know who you are. So for me, I think depending on how much you use your WhatsApp account for business, I lean towards using a business profile picture there.
Yeah.
That would, I think that's a personal decision maybe to make. But if, like for instance, next week there's a big seminar in Cape Town that I'm covering for the 3 days, so I'm there the whole time. And in those cases, there's a lot of WhatsApps and things going around. You need to be here. You got to go and meet these people, and we've given your number to this guy. They'll contact you. You need to do this and that and the other. And for the 3 days that I'm there, I'm going to change my profile just to my business profile, so they can see, oh, this is the person. This is the right person.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes complete sense. So Danie, I know there's, you've been entrenched in this topic for years and studied it, and you do it every day. So I know there's so much more to speak about. And of course, if people want professional photography, they can go to you or someone like you. But for someone who's just starting off and maybe isn't in a position where they can hire somebody professional, what are some tips that you would give for someone who wants to build their profile so that it gives a really positive first impression?
Okay. The easiest shots to manage, because I suppose the chances that picture will be taken with a cell phone as well. The basics apply. It's a window light is generally a good soft window light. So in other words, not the sun, like glaring through the window. It's the daylight coming through your window. That is good light because it's soft. It won't create harsh shadows. It's slightly from the top, and your camera, the dynamic range of a phone camera will be able to handle the shadow versus highlight ratio. Because what happens sometimes with the cell phone, if it's very contrasty, the image just looks rubbish. So use window light or light like it, soft light, with other words. Because if you use any sort of directional light, it needs to be managed. Now, we would suppose that person's not in a position to manage it. They don't have lights that they can move around. So you have to use a big, soft light source like your window. And then I'd say with your background, try and keep it neutral. These things, I suppose it's kind of speaks for itself, but try and keep it neutral. And for the most part, try and keep it light. And the reason for that is it's just the way that these cameras meter at the lighting. It's very difficult sometimes for those light meters to get a good exposure on a dark background. Like if I let the webcam, because currently the video is streaming from one of my cameras, but if I was using my webcam right now, my face would be white and everything else would be black completely, because the camera just cannot deal with that kind of dynamic range. Whereas I'm sitting across a video camera that's supposed to do this. So keep your background light. Try and get away from your background. Don't go and stand right up against the wall. You find that often people almost like So create distance between you and your background, so that if there's something that is in the background, it might actually be out of focus, which is fine. I think for the most part, try and avoid bookshelves. People love the bookshelf. There's a Twitter account called Bookshelf Credibility, and all it is just people in front of bookshelves. Because and I understand why. In an office, that's sometimes the only place that has some form of a homogeneous background. So, and it's kind of it speaks to whatever the person might do and whatever. But I think for profile pics, maybe try not to have a bookshelf in the background unless you're an author or an academic of some sort. But basics is lots of light background and makeup for ladies. And it's not because there's anything wrong with your face. It's because cameras and lights pick up on highlights. I mean, that's just, I shoot with extremely expensive equipment and with big lights and softeners, like people call them. If somebody has, some sort of sheen on their face, it's going to show. So a little bit of base, a little bit of powder does the world of good. Yeah.
Thanks, Danie. Now, those are some good tips.